Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. How much worse can it get for Manchester United? 3 games into the new season and Grimsby Town have knocked them out of the Carabao Cup. Joining us today, we have the Athletic's Adam Crafton. We've also got Mark Critchley as well. And later on, we'll be joined by Grimsby Town owner Jason Stockwood, who had a little something to say about Manchester United's brand new forward.
I don't know if you saw the goal he took, the touch and the finish. You'd struggle to know who was the £73 million striker on the field last night, the way he took that goal. And I don't know if you saw the bicy that Sesko tried, where he just so Charles looked like he was worth 73 million last night.
Before we get into any of that, let's lay down the state of play. Manchester United have lost to 4th-tier opposition for the first time ever. 2 of their big money signings missed a penalty. Penalties their manager couldn't even bring himself to watch. Their out-of-favour goalkeeper returned to play a part in both Grimsby goals. And after the game, Ruben Amorim questioned his own position. Adam, with your Manchester United hat on, how did you feel watching that match?
One of the most, I think probably the most haunting game that Man United have experienced, certainly since the Europa League final.
Back like 3 months ago. Wow.
It's obviously hugely humiliating, embarrassing. You can use whatever adjective you want. I think where it's so damaging is, you've had this period where the club, perhaps Amorim himself, perhaps the players who remain, the players who join, the fans to an extent have convinced themselves that things might get better. And this was just, it was probably, I can't really think of a worse performance in terms of, you take the first hour of the game at least, it was really bad in pretty much every way. It wasn't a team of kids. There was a couple of young players in defence, but it wasn't, as if they'd put in a bunch of 20-year-olds. And it was a really bad night that kind of got worse and worse. I mean, the weather kind of added to the scene of it. You've got this coach who is drowning, really, visibly and figuratively, quivering in the dugout as his team take penalties. Even the penalties themselves, we'll talk about this. You've got a striker that's just been bought for 70-odd million pounds, who's the last guy to take the penalty. And then you've got the manager coming out after the game, really giving major hints which either question his players' commitment and also appear to say that in some ways his future may be in doubt as well. So it's a pretty cataclysmic evening by every measure.
Yeah, I mean, Critch, please give some props to Grimsby Town for their grit, their poise, and just taking the game to Manchester United. I mean, how hard is it to see a team like Manchester United lose such a game?
Well, look, I've been asked a lot of times on podcasts like these over the last few years whether we've reached the nadir. And I guess, given that I keep being asked it, I suppose we haven't, right? I'm sort of being goaded into doing the Mick McCarthy being like, can it get any worse? But all the evidence until this point suggests that it can and that it probably will. I remember the last time I think I was on this podcast, I was answering questions about how there was a happier mood within the camp, that it was more optimistic, that there was positivity heading into a new season, and that those were the vibes from the pre-season tour. I think, look, you always, I think I certainly try to treat that with a healthy dose of skepticism at the same time, because there's always more positivity ahead of a new season. But we had colleagues of mine were over there in the US, people were talking, when you spoke to people, there was something to that. And then this morning, the messages and the feedback that I've had overnight for people to speak to, this morning it's just very different in tone. And it's staggering, really, that it's the 28th of August and the transfer window isn't closed. We're 3 games in and we've already reached a point that feels so familiar to various points that we've been at over the years under different Manchester United managers. And I think being asked, is this the worst cup result that they have in their history? And the obvious parallel would be the 4-0 against MK Dons back in 2014, the last time they were in the League Cup second round. I remember the Leeds game in 2010 when Beckford scored, beat them at Old Trafford. I think they lost 3-0 to York City in 1995. So, you could list off a ream of results that rival it as maybe one of the most embarrassing in a cup sense in United's history. But those results, they were always like aberrations, right, in largely successful periods. And I think the worrying thing about last night was the question is, where does this now leave Amorim? Where does this leave United? And that is a very uncertain question.
Yeah, don't worry. We'll be talking about Amorim in just a bit, but I just want to talk about the attacking prowess. I don't know if prowess is probably the right word to use right now for the likes of Cunha and Mbeumo and also Benjamin Sesko, Adam. What did you make of their performance?
It was Sesko's first start. He wasn't very good. Equally, I think people may increasingly come to the view that certain positions in this system, because we're seeing a lot of different personnel now attempt to play in this system. You know, we saw Rasmus Højlund look a shadow of the player that he was never fantastic for Man United, but he was showing glimpses of a player that might be someone, and really struggled in this system. And I think Sesko, so far, in the glimpses we've had of him, I don't think he's at full match speed yet, so it's hard to make a judgment. But I do wonder how easy it is to play that role at the level that Man United want to be at, and also the central midfield role as well. You know, there's two in central midfield. We're seeing a lot of very, very expensive players find it really difficult. So I think there's questions over, is this about personnel? Is it about system? I think it also comes back to, you're playing a fourth division team, right? Like Grimsby drew against Accrington at the weekend. They've drawn against Harrogate this season. They are unbeaten in the league, by the way, so not an easy place to go.
Also unbeaten against Manchester United, Grimsby Town, in the last few matches. Come on, give him some credit.
That's true. Since the stats since 1930 or something, isn't it? With the attacking players, I mean, and Mbeumo scored a goal. I thought he was probably the brightest of them. Cunha. It was interesting watching him during the game because he sort of started really brightly against Arsenal and against Fulham, and you could see him just sort of being dragged into this quagmire, both the visible quagmire on the pitch, but also the metaphorical quagmire. You could see him almost starting to become sort of stressed and anxious on the field, obviously culminating in missed penalties. Look, anyone can miss a penalty. That can happen. I wouldn't worry too much about that. I don't think the story of last night is going after Man United's new attacking players. It was a performance where, go to like the meme of the basics of football, losing duels, not competing, the passing was terrible. And then, the goalkeeper, honestly, he's the worst goalkeeper I've ever seen in 30 years of supporting Man United. Worst regular goalkeeper. I won't include Taibbi.
Yeah, well, we spoke about it yesterday. David Ornstein, Critch, was basically talking about Manchester United potentially being on the look for a goalkeeper. Is it fair to say that the striking position probably wasn't their biggest issue, that there are actually a few more issues on the field that probably needed addressing before that?
Well, look, I think it's important to remember that they were ending last season in the context of 44 Premier League goals, which was the fewest that they'd scored in the Premier League era. So you look at that and you think, well, that is certainly an issue that needs to be addressed as much as goalkeeper was. I think the question mark has to be, do you address that sort of, a lack of goals by signing goal scorers? That sounds like a bit of a daft question to pose, but goals don't exist in isolation, right? They are... They come from chances that are created, and United weren't a particularly creative team last season. Too much of that burden fell on Bruno Fernandes. You look at the way that they try to build up from out the back. As much as they do try to build up from out the back, it's striking actually over the last, we're talking about goalkeepers, it's striking how over the last 6 months or so, it's all been long kicks out the back. You think of the game against Fulham on Sunday, what was the one chance that they actually, clear-cut chance that they actually created within that game? It was a Bayern long goal kick, straight out from the back that Cunha had this miraculous touch brought down and got a shot on goal from. That sort of thing is not the methodical, repeatable patterns of play that people thought we were going to get with Ruben Amorim, thought they were going to get with Erik ten Hag, etc., etc. And this is becoming a pattern. And I don't think it's as simple as saying, well, this guy scored a lot of goals last season, this guy scored a lot of goals, we signed them and we fix our problem. It doesn't add up. I agree with Adam completely that there was a clear need at goalkeeper. They didn't address it. They may still address it before the end of the window. We know that they're in talks for Senne Lammens at Antwerp, but there's no agreement on personal terms yet. There's no agreement on fee. I think, but last night highlighted why United are in that market now. I don't think it changed anyone's opinions about Onana. I don't think it changed anyone's opinions about Bayindia the last few games either. It's clear that there's been an issue there, and you've seen momentum build over the last couple of weeks when Bayindia has made a mistake against Arsenal, and there's been these question marks over Onana. It may yet get done, but look, if there's not one position that you look at in this United squad and say, well, if you get that, everything's fine, everything's fixed. There's too many of those.
Adam, he says something has to change and you're not going to change 22 players again. What do you read from that?
Far too emotional. Creates, like, if you were to just step back from the heat of last night, right? Man United have had 3 games this season. They've played pretty well against Arsenal, the team that I think most people think will be first or second in the league this season. Probably not a game you'd expect them to win. And against Fulham away, they've drawn, right? It's not a disaster. They are 36 games to go. They're 3 points off the Champions League places, right? And they've had a disastrous night, right? But I think for the manager to then be so emotional, right? And I'm not making out that he should be coming out and saying everything's great or it'll all be fine, but for him to be suggesting that, the players were sending a message of some sort, but not really explaining what that message is, but implying, it seemed to me he was implying they down tools in some ways, or that they were unhappy with something that he was asking them to do, and then suggesting that things will get sorted during the international break. Well, during the international break, the transfer window's closed, and the only thing that can change at that point is the manager. So you then create this round of speculation by being so emotional. And we know that previously he has basically gone to the club when things were bad at a certain point last season and essentially said, should I be carrying on? So I think that's a problem. I think that's a problem because when he's at his best, as he was, I was out there in the States in pre-season, he can be very charismatic when he's calm and collected and explaining his vision. But at his worst, the energy that he creates is frenzied. And I can't imagine how much pressure that now puts on the team in front of the home fans at Old Trafford in another banana skin at home to Burnley, right? In terms of, that's a game that I look at and think, on the one hand, I think United won't change the manager because they're so far deep into the Amorim project. But I also can't imagine them keeping a manager that loses consecutively against Grimsby and against Burnley at home. That's just purely like, it's almost unfathomable in some ways. So it's now created that situation where there's going to be a blaze of uncertainty, and that's on him, really.
Yeah. It's not the first time he's shown emotion. I mean, all last season, there were definite moments, Critch. But, we often talk about the shirt weighing heavy on players at Manchester United. Could this also be an indication of the shirt weighing heavy on a manager as well?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, as Adam says, he's an emotive person. He's an open person. He's honest to a fault a lot of the time. I see no reason not to believe him when he says things like this, when he says that he's considering his future. He's not holding anything back. And, if anything, he's probably sharing over a little bit too much, right? And you're right, he said it before. He intimated at various points last season that he might have a more enjoyable life if he wasn't the Manchester United manager. Post Europa League final, he said he'd go without a conversation about compensation if that's what the hierarchy wanted. Now, whether that was him saying you don't need to pay me, or it's him saying it's in the contract, actually, we don't need to have a conversation about it, it'll be £8 million or whatever, please, I don't know. But he's clearly entertaining these things in public, and not even just in public. I mean, I think we did, the colleague Laurie Whitwell was writing in his big end of the season read how these noises were being about him walking were going on internally as well, and were taken quite seriously at points. So I see no reason to disbelieve him. I think the difference from last night is bringing the players into it. Him saying the players spoke really loud about what they want. Again, as Adam said at the top of the programme, that brings in the question of how committed these players are. And we're talking in a context of 5 players within this squad already being bombed out of it because they weren't seen to be aligned with the club's direction and moving forwards. So, I mean, after United did that, they said, we're looking to build a squad focused on winning the biggest trophies at Manchester United, and this is part of that process. So last night's 11 was drawn for that squad that is apparently aligned to this vision, and yet the manager comes out afterwards and says, and sort of brazenly questions their level of commitment, and questions it in a way that can be read about their commitment to him, as though he's questioning that and what he wants to do. So I think, look, it's not the first time he's said this, and you've got to try and believe him when he says it. I almost feel like if it keeps being a repeated thing, then it becomes more and more of a problem. I know when he was asked about this in the US during the preseason tour, and he said, look, I'm an emotive guy, I'm a romantic guy. Sometimes it's my ego that gets in the way and makes me say these things. But if it keeps happening, it has to speak to some deeper kernel of truth within him that he isn't totally happy, I guess, in doing the job. And that is a huge question now.
Adam, is it ego that's basically stopping him from changing his tactics fundamentally? Because I can't stop seeing that image of him on the side, just fiddling with the tactics, on that board. How defining do you think that image will be?
I mean, it looked like he was playing battleships with those little magnets. But so I have a slightly different view on that, which is that all these kind of idiosyncrasies, right? Messing around with a tactics board in the dugout. If you're winning and doing that, people would be really excited saying, what an amazing tactician, right? It'd be a detail in an Athletic long read about how meticulous he is, about even in the middle of the game, he's checking this stuff.
Got my number.
Right. Even, when he's not watching the penalty shootout, which I didn't love. Other managers do the same. I think Jurgen Klopp did it at some point as well. That's another thing where if it all goes well and it's a Champions League penalty shootout and you win it, then it's fine. But it's fourth division in the rain at Grimsby, and it looks like you're quivering and hiding. So a lot of that stuff is optics. I think there is a deeper issue about the system and the intransigence, the inflexibility around that. But he was hired knowing that's what he was going to do. He's never said to people, I won't do this. However, no one ever thought that, if you just take a step back and assess this really, really objectively, right? What is it? 7 wins in the Premier League out of 29, 30 games. Losing the Europa League final. He keeps saying they played well in that final. They didn't. The alienating and kicking out Garnacho, Rashford, TBD on what happens with Kobbie Mainoo, losing against Grimsby, but the problem is they are now so deep into it, right? You look at the squad composition, if a new coach comes in who wants to play 4-3-3, well, they would probably want Garnacho, and he's probably on the motorway now heading down to Chelsea. And they might want to play with fullbacks. And I mean, would Patrick Dorgu get a game under a different coach? He's so specific for what Ruben Amorim's trying to do. So there are complicated layers to this, and it goes beyond Amorim in terms of, it was really interesting. It was put to me in the summer when they were out in Chicago by someone that if the momentum of this preseason, this better feeling, by the way, the preseason wasn't that good. They drew 3 games, one against Everton, one against Leeds, one against Fiorentina. It was a bit like they'd beaten Real Madrid, Bayern Munich and Barcelona in some of the feedback. But there was a sense of momentum and unity. And if that had gone right, it could have been like rocket fuel and really kind of sent them forwards. But if it goes wrong, there's so much now that is tied to Amorim. The CEO Barada was very influential in that appointment. I know he said in an interview that technical staff were behind that, but he was very much behind that as well. Does that then mean that the club have as much faith in Barada? And if they don't have as much faith in Barada, what does that then mean from all these other people from Manchester City, like Jason Wilcox, sporting director, as well? A lot of people's success at Manchester United are tied to the success of Ruben Amorim. And I think that's probably what buys him time, to be honest, at the moment.
Okay. You look at Grimsby Town and, you look at a team that in some senses, some might say showed composure, character, often words associated with an old version of Manchester United. And we talk about Amorim, and this is to you both. Critch, please go first. Do you think he's got it in him to instill these values in these players fundamentally? Because I do wonder how difficult it is to come back from defeats like this and still believe that this is the guy that's going to lead you to victory.
I feel like that is an open question at the moment. I think that there is, he has taken a lot of very bold decisions, and decisions that some people won't like. Again, you come back to the treatment of the 5 players this summer. I think if you ask most United fans, they would say they weren't particularly bothered about seeing those players leave, and fair enough, and maybe it was the end for them. But to do it in such a way which has probably had knock-on effects and consequences for their own for United's ability to sell them and the value that they're getting for those players in the market as well. That is a huge step, and it's one that not everybody will agree with, I'm sure, within the club. Then you look at the treatment of somebody like Kobbie Mainoo. Now, look, he played last night. The whole of yesterday was a big frenzy about Kobbie Mainoo and his future, and the past few days have been right. That all seems to have subsided now in the wake of the result and this seismic event of United falling back into crisis. But that is an ongoing thing as well, and people would question that. He needs to build a defining kind of vision and aura and narrative around his way of doing things to bring people along with him. And if I'm totally honest, I don't think I've ever really had a full sense that has happened at any point over the last 9 months or so. If you think back to it gets mentioned a lot, but the comment about this being the worst United side in history, like whether he meant it as a criticism of the players or not, that's certainly how it was taken, and therefore it doesn't help, right? I think moments like that have hindered him along the way, and so it's really difficult to see how he turns that around. I think the only way of turning it around is by getting results, right?
We're now joined by Grimsby Town owner Jason Stockwood. Jason, so good to have you with us. Some might say you battered Manchester United yesterday. Talk to me about the last 12 hours.
Oh, let's get all the fishing puns out of the way early.
I had to do it.
Yeah, no, it was... Yeah, look, what a magical evening. It's, we got involved with the club about 4 years ago, and, you think of football as a metaphor for life, and this, without going out of the cliches, this idea of David versus Goliath, a club of our resources against the almost seemingly infinite resources against Manchester United, and being able to do it just really makes you fall in love with the game again. We couldn't be happier.
Yeah, for sure. What happens when a team like yours does beat Manchester United in terms of, firstly, team morale, but secondly, in terms of the noise that sort of starts circulating around the club?
Yeah, when we got involved with the club, it was sort of the dual purpose. One, we were fans originally, and we're just fortunate that we had the careers that allowed us the resources to really improve the outcomes on the pitch. But it's all in service of, we're really trying to change the narrative on the town. We're a sort of post-industrial fishing town associated with the fishing industry. That's gone away. We're proud of that history. And now we're navigating towards a green energy revolution that we're right in the heart of. So the football club is part of putting a new story and narrative into the town. So being on the world stage, being invited onto, podcasts like this, being on CBS in the US, being on BBC This Morning, just gives us a chance to tell that story, that more positive story, which is real in the town. And just seeing... the excellence that we showed last night, it wasn't a lucky win. It was everything that we're about. We're trying to use, progressive football, a brilliant coach, a brilliant CEO, and raise the standard of the town and the club. And last night puts us in the spot out as we wanted. So it's a real opportunity. We're taking off the opportunity to use this, talking to people just to say, look, have a look at Grimsby again, but think differently. It's a town on the up.
Jason, it's really interesting. In the middle of the game, I think at the point you were 2-0 up, I had a look at this kind of the Google search trends, which tell you how often something is being searched. And there was obviously a very big spike on Grimsby being searched globally as kind of the world took notice of this. But the biggest kind of trend spike before that was Brexit back in kind of 2016 with the fishing town. So you've mentioned in terms of changing perceptions of the town and where the town's going. Can you just talk a little bit about what the tangible impact is from a financial point of view, both for the club and also just for how it changes people's perceptions of Grimsby in some way?
Oh, there's a lot in that, Adam. So after Brexit, I actually went back to university as a fellow at Oxford to think about these issues. So I'm from the town. I'm proud to be from the town. My career's taken me away, and I really didn't understand Brexit. I didn't understand why it had happened, and so I spent 2 years thinking and writing about it. And what I realised is and again, this is my own diagnosis, but it's taken from a lot of reading of other great writers around. We've lost somewhat our civic institutions over the last 50 years that bind our communities. And Andrew, my co-investor, and our bet was like the football club and football clubs in general are probably the last civic institutions that are so important to our identity, that are potent still and go across political boundaries, go across gender, ethnicity, whatever vendor of identity. We can come together around football and still be proud and have a common purpose together. So it sounds slightly grandiose, but it was part of why we're doing this. Is like we think you can create a better narrative about a place by identifying with some positive professionalism and the stuff like last night. On an economic point of view, I think if you tell that story and you don't get into sort of the lazy tropes about, Grimsby's been the butt of a lot of jokes for years. A lot of documentaries have come up and told the stories of kind of like poverty porn, where they go and show the poorest parts of the community. It's a beautiful place on the coast in northeast Lincolnshire. It is stunning. And we've all got those bad elements and elements that need some work in a town, but it's a town with great character, great people, great humour. And so, again, we think sport is the perfect mechanism to try and exemplify those values, right, and tell the story that we want to tell. And then in hard currency, like it wasn't a big earner for us last night. It was more about, when the draw came out, people said, would you have liked it at Old Trafford? And once you get past wouldn't mind playing there, you go, actually, why it was so brilliant last night is because it was at home. And the world gets to see where we live and what we're about. And the pitch looked beautiful. The old stadium looked beautiful. The crowd did their job, was the genuine cliche 12th man. And so, the economic value is one thing, but like in the sort of balance sheet of your life, it's not monetary. It's just all the effort and positivity that will come out of this is worth its weight in gold, as well as reaffirming your faith in sort of the romance of what sport is, right, as well. Sorry, Adam, that was a long-winded answer to. By the way, that was probably the short answer as well. There's a lot more to
that. Jason, can you talk to us a little bit about some of your players, especially the goalkeeper, Christy Pym? I heard a story last night that he turned to the United away end and said, I'm a United fan. And they said, well, why don't you let one in then? But he played out of his skin. People won't really know about him. Tyrell Warren as well. He used to be at United, right? So tell us a bit more about the squad and some stories that we should know about there.
Yeah, so Christy was on ITV. Someone sent me the clip this morning where he said, he says, I'm a United fan. I'm partly fuming. I saved that penalty, which was a lovely moment and admission from him. So, and actually Charles Vernon, who scored, you struggled, wouldn't you, when I don't know if you saw the goal he took, the touch and the finish, you'd struggle to know who was the 73 million pound striker on the field last night, the way he took that goal. And I don't know if you saw the bicey that Sesko tried, where he just so Charles looked like he was worth 73 million last night. And look, we've assembled a squad. I don't know if you've seen any of the articles, but we were really fortunate a few years ago that when we played Brighton in the Cup, I got to meet Tony Bloom, and because I'm a technologist by background and an entrepreneur, we asked Tony if we could use their data. And in the moment, he said no about it, but 6 months later, they must have done diligence on it. And their Jamestown Analytics, which is the company that manages the data for Brighton and only a handful of teams globally, they said they'd allow us to use it. So we built this incredibly fortunate partnership with Jamestown, where we look analytically around the globe for players. So you saw players last night. Geza David Torrey, we recruited him from the Faroe Islands. We've got Jason Svan Thorson on the bench, who's an Icelandic player. Christie came in, slightly older goalkeepers, incredibly highly rated through the data. So I don't like to single out players specifically, but even people like Jays Caballero we got from Truro, like Jays will be one of the best players in our division, no doubt about it. He's already showing that. But the data tells us that story. So, but what people misheard from me a couple of years ago when I started talking about data was data gets you halfway. It tells you objectively on certain characteristics and variables how good their physical attributes are, how their playing attributes are. And then as importantly, the other 50% is the coaching, is the culture, is the attitude, is the character of the players. And I think what we've got now, for the first time, because we had a bunch of players that we were, trying to improve on and out of contract, this is the first time we've got a squad that's fully data-led. But importantly, it's based on the progressive coaching of David Artell, who is the coach from a data point of view, the most improved players in the Football League. And I think he showed some of that last night.
Yeah, there was an amazing stat that I think Ian Dennis from the BBC tweeted saying the Sesko fee alone was 13 times Grimsby's turnover last season. I mean, that just kind of brings home the gap. I'm just wondering your emotions within the game at the point where the rain was really coming down and the pitch was slowing down a bit. Were you worried at all that that game might get abandoned or get delayed in some way?
Spot on, Adam. My wife turned to me. My wife's a really nervous watcher. I was pretty relaxed most day because it was a free hit for us last night, right? No one expected. Everyone expected. In fact, I came over on the train and I heard some United fans talking about, "Oh, this should be a piece of piss. We're going to wallop this lot." I was remembering. Drove home. I was like, "That was nice." But my wife's a really nervous watcher, and she turned around to me. It was raining, and said, "If it gets called off, it was 2-0 up, wasn't it?" And she says, "If it gets called off, do we get the win?" And I was like, "No, it'd be awful if it's called off. We have to play again." And so two things. So one, that was the only time I was nervous through the game. I was thinking it was coming down. It was biblical. There was lightning in the background. It was such a theatrical setting. And then we've spent a lot of money on the pitch, and just shout out to our ground staff. It has never looked better. And when that rain come down, it didn't retain a lot of the water. So the drainage system we're putting, I mean, it's boring for people to hear, but the stuff I know about pitches and drainage, you wouldn't care to talk about. But it was, I said to them before the game, just shout out to Martin and that team. They've done such a great job. And then to see that rain come down, on biblical proportions, and the surface still be playable. But yeah, when it started to lighten up, I was very relieved. And eventually, my wife went in the penalty. She couldn't take it anymore. She went inside and sat with a cup of tea, I think. So,
was she with Ruben, not watching the penalties?
No comment on that. I've already said God. I'll tell you one funny quick thing though. So with Manchester United coming to town, they sent us almost a rider for the manager, and I was like, "Where's the manager's changing room?" And I was like, "No, the manager's changing room for us is the back of his car." The fact that the manager has a changing room at Man United tells you things they were expecting, and so I thought that was quite amusing. I thought they clearly didn't know what they were coming into, and when the players came off the bus and onto the pitch, I was stood around, and the United players did not look like they were up for it. You could tell, this was, it's all the cliches about, you got all those incredible talents. And look, I'm a massive fan of the Premier League. The individual talent on display last night was extraordinary. The team performance, speaks for itself, I think, from United. But it was seeing them coming in, I was like, they did not look like they wanted to be there, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, just before you go, I saw a comment on social media I thought was really funny, saying Grimsby Town played their second team because they've got a big game against Bristol Rovers this weekend, which I thought was quite funny. But I mean, how do you genuinely manage expectation moving forward? Because I mean, this is a monumental result for the team. You've still got a league that you want to obviously win as well, or maybe climb to the next one. How do you manage expectation for the rest of the season at this point?
So that's the manager's job, to manage expectations. I'm going to enjoy every single minute of this. I keep saying to people, like, we look, the town and the club has had a tough sort of 20 years watching it as a fan. So you've got to take the good days when you can, So for me, I'm an optimist by nature. I've had a career as an entrepreneur doing stuff I wouldn't be otherwise. And so I'm loving this. I'm saying, look, I went into that game thinking we could win, which is ridiculous, right? From you look at our relative resources, but we've got a team and, and importantly, a coach that is improving players, and the people that are coming to us, we know they've got the quality, and if they improve, will be a match for anyone. And we showed that last night. So I'm going to get carried away. I'm going to love this and keep going. And look, it'll be as exciting against Bristol Rovers on Saturday, and it was as exciting against Accrington last week. So, but it was a magical night, and they don't come around that often. So you've got to enjoy them, I think.
Jason, just one last one from me. First of all, will there be any kind of treat for the coach and the players as a result of this? And also, there's obviously so much talk about the pyramid and the value of the pyramid. And we see the Premier League trying to the EFL trying to come to a deal with the Premier League. That seems to just go on and on and on. How important is that the Premier League recognises the value of every team within that ecosystem?
Well, we saw it last night, Adam. Look, we've been a big proponent of the independent regulator in the UK, and I've written and we've lobbied quite hard for that. And it's happened, right? This Labour government has passed that through law, and so that is happening. So there will be a financial settlement. If the Premier League don't make an offer to the EFL, then David Cogan, as the new chairman of the independent regulator has the backstop powers to enforce one, right? So it's in their interest to put something on the table. I slightly grandiose again, so apologies, but I make a moral argument for this. It's like, we know, and last night showed, the Premier League, for all its brilliance as a product, which it is, and we should be so proud of it as a country, is built on over 140 years of work of 92 plus teams, right? We all own that. And just because the music stops now doesn't mean they should take all the profit and all the benefit of that. You need clubs like Grimsby. You need a competitive structure because it means something. They don't really exist without the promotion and relegation. And quite frankly, half of our time as a club in our 148-year history was either in the top two divisions. So at some point, we've all been there, right? So I think there's a moral argument that it's built on the shoulders of every single club. And then the important thing is these aren't businesses, right? The football clubs, as shown by that pitch invasion last night, these are so important to our communities, to our identity, to our sense of hope and aspiration and love and connection as communities, is that this is an asset. These are assets worth protecting for future generations. And I think it's a tip of the iceberg for the Premier League to be putting more cash down into it. Importantly, there needs to be cost controls around it. There needs to be better owners and directors tests. All that's coming. But I think last night showed that, money isn't a guarantee of success. It definitely helps. But culture, you need the strong culture, great coaches, and a plan, right, to execute on, and heart and soul. And I think last night, just for the romantics amongst us, just shows what might be possible and why the lower leagues are so important, because it means so much to towns like ours up and down the country.
Yeah, well, you definitely brought some joy to so many rival fans last night, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Appreciate your time, guys. Thanks a lot.
All right. Cheers, guys. Mark, Adam, and Jason, thanks so much for your time. And also for more on Manchester United, you can, of course, listen to Talk of the Devils. I think I can hear Andy Mitten seething in his chair right now. That's all for now. Catch you soon. For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.